Let me start by congratulating Professor Arun Kumar for a most comprehensive treatment. I am quite astonished that a person who is not a practicing chartered accountant nor a practicing lawyer can do such an analytical work. I know he is an economist, but this is hardcore analytical operational work. And I think there are very few in the country who can pretend to even begin to understand this absolute morass of technicality and detail. I think he has considerably simplified it, although I haven't read the book in great detail. I have flipped through portions, and I find that it's a very, very complex subject which is tried to be simplified to the lowest denominator as far as possible. The other thing about the book on which he deserves congratulations is that it is a very interesting wide span of the historical. He has a chapter 3 on that, of the political and the social, another chapter on that, and of course the whole of it is economics. And most important, it's not airy-fairy, it's concrete and ends with a chapter where he propounds his own view, his own theory of what he calls a more simple alternative. I think therefore it is professorial as befits a professor, and it is objective as befits the husband of a journalist with whom we interact quite frequently. And most importantly, I think he's been able to deliver this book very quickly, although I thought that it's probably more recent than November, but he's had about a year of the operational reality, or a year and a half of the operational reality of GST on the ground, and he has captured it. So it's the right timing. Let me start by saying that a tax or a concept which has spawned so many acronyms, most of them unflattering, cannot really be good, at least in operational reality. I have yet to come across so many of them. I jotted some of them down in coming here. Of course, there is the flattering single one, good and simple tax. But there is, of course, the ground scorching tax, the topic of this, the title of this book. There was the Gabbar Singh tax. There is the grand stupid thought. The very interesting acronym that I found one in Hindi as well. G for Gai, S for Sarkar, and T for Tumhari. So it can't be a very good operational concept if it resulted in so many reactions, most of them unflattering. Let me start by making 6 or 7 simpler points. And I can tell you that I do not have anywhere near a fraction of the technical expertise required to speak on GST. I'd be surprised if many of us on this table did, but certainly I can make a voluntary disclosure about myself. Nevertheless, the 4 or 5 broad points are that the very philosophical constitutional concept of a GST starts from the concept of a common market. Our constitution, in a sense, recognizes a common market in the set of articles which are 300, 301, etc., etc. A common India for trade and commerce. Well, that one nation concept, which is the propounding concept of GST, and obviously some of us differ with Professor Kumar that it is so fatally flawed in structure that it ought never to have been conceived. I don't quite agree with that. But nevertheless, if you have this original concept of a common commercial economic market, then intrinsically if you start with 8 rates, that starts with the fatal flaw against the very concept. Secondly, no capping of a rate, not even at 24%, not even at 18% of course. Thirdly, directly contrary to the CAA's written recommendation. Arvind Subramaniam calculated, in fact he calculated the average rate at 15 and you could have gone up to 80, which is what the Congress was demanding. But no approach towards the basic rate and a capping. Exclusion of large swathes of the economy. Construction has been mentioned with a partial inclusion. But of course petrol is the most important, where effective tax rates have been calculated to be as high as 60 to 70%. The tax on petrol, which is excluded, effectively varies between 55 to 70%. Of course, construction is there and alcohol is there. Fifthly, I think there could have been a methodology of a pilot or a trial run. I'm not sure how it would be structured, but it's possible to do it. And a 6-month trial run, minimum, would have at least resulted in nitty-gritty details which might have led us to defer, improve, recast, etc. What happened was, unfortunately, that the trials and tribulations, because of a lack of a trial, ensued. And I have no doubt and no hesitation in saying it, I don't think I'm making a purely political comment, that it was egos which came in. The government of the day and the Prime Minister had to have this tryst with midnight speech. He had to have a fixed date. So we all had to awake, not into joy and glory as in 1947, but into harassment and imperfect, completely imperfectly configured tax. And therefore that date became sacrosanct. It was the antithesis of any trial run. And it got mixed up with jumlebazi, with event management and with optics. Hardly the right setting for something as fundamental as GST. In fact, shortly after this midnight inauguration, Mr. Jayant Sinha, I think against the wiser, sager and saner counsel of his father, made this interesting statement that it's like a grand Indian wedding. And a lot of wags commented that this is a strange wedding where the bride is very sad and unhappy, the groom is miserable, and the entire barat is depressed. Only the Purohit is very happy. Incidentally, the same Purohit, when he did a wedding on a smaller scale in Gujarat, was heavily opposed to this idea. The biggest opposition to this idea came from Gujarat. But then Purohits who become politicians cannot have an estoppel. Let me give you, from an operational reality viewpoint, 4 or 5 facets about how in operational reality, and I think you can't have a structurally perfect tax, but you can create something which in operational reality is much better. 5 or 6 facets of how this can be and should be improved. Because I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. One is the much needed advanced ruling authority. They've created an advanced ruling authority. Now the problem with the advanced ruling authority in GST is that different advanced ruling authorities in different parts of India are giving totally opposite and diverse advanced rulings, thereby creating more confusion. Whereas the object is the exact opposite, namely seamless consistency. There are many examples which Professor Kumar is better qualified to speak on, but one example is on the so-called whether cess can be transitioned under GST. The Maharashtra authority says no, the Andhra Pradesh authority gives a different view, and you have confusion, confounded galore. Now, the GST Council has recommended a single window, uniform approach to the advanced ruling authority, but that has not yet fructified. That's my point number 1. Point number 2 is that there is a lot of practical, on the ground, genuine complaint, and you need to talk to uninterested, objective stakeholders in the system who will tell you how the anti-profiteering rules are being misused. The anti-profiteering rule in this particular case is one of the shortest set of rules I have seen, and therefore they remain delightfully vague. They give a large degree of subjectivity which results in harassment. I think they need to be streamlined, especially for the small and medium level people. And it has led to selectivity in terms of, it's a very draconian power, by the way, on anti-profiteering. So if I decide to use it against you in a selective manner, it can have grave and irreversible consequences. The third issue, closer home, is for the community of lawyers. We have happily, at least my category of senior counsel, has been happily exempt, inverted commas, by the reverse charge mechanism, which was there in the old service tax as well. So senior counsel, although subject to the erstwhile service tax and now the GST, are subject to the tax, but there's a reverse charge mechanism, which means that the payer bears it and he bears all the headache. But the confusion was created because when the GST came, they said all of the legal community is subject to the tax. And then, having subjected them to the tax, it was unclear because they said only the representational part of the legal community will have the reverse charge mechanism, which means people like us who represent people would have a reverse charge, which is less harassment. But a large swathe of corporate lawyers or chamber lawyers perhaps would have to be subjected to GST. Now that had a very draconian effect for almost 6 to 8 months before it was clarified as under the old service tax that the entire legal sector is subject to a reverse charge mechanism. All that it means is that this zigzag procedure creates a lot of harassment. A legal community is of course a very vocal community, and a lot of the flack which the government got was from this vocal community for these zigzags in implementation. In fact, somebody said that GST left women relieved because now men had found something other than women that they could not understand and yet were compelled to follow. Of course, a lot of sufferers commented that after GST, the one thing which has become very much cheaper is free advice. Although a huge sector is out there also giving paid advice, and that is perhaps the biggest benefit to the economy. A huge sector trying to iron out the difficulties which I think large parts of that sector of advisors themselves don't understand. Litigation, and some of the bureaucrats are at record in the earlier stages. Mr. Adya made a comment. It was expected to increase with lots of repetitions on GST. But given the fact that the total indirect tax sector has 2 lakh crore worth of value of litigation locked up in courts, 2 lakh crores, I am very worried if the full potential of litigation under GST yet to be unleashed is actually unleashed. It would lead to a very big blockage in the system. Mercifully, it hasn't happened fully yet. A couple of more points and I'm done. One is on the federal structure. Now it is true that by calling it a GST council, and the finance minister repeatedly likes to call it cooperative federalism at its best, he says federalism is not effective or diluted. But in a very real sense, federalism is effective. Federalism is effective because individual states, because first of all, rates, taxes, applicability, chargeability, to the extent there are state charged taxes, are very much a part of federalism. Now the zone of operation of a state in going to the nitty-gritty of a rate, of a structure and the chargeable scope of a tax under GST is highly limited. It is limited to what elbow room it has in the GST council. In the GST council, it's a 3/4 decision-making majority. 1/3 is a kind of a veto weightage with the central government. So I think it's more appropriate to call it controlled, highly controlled federalism rather than cooperative federalism. And I think that is an area which as time goes by may lead to problems within the GST council as well. There is a disparity among states and the elbow room is limited. One clear good thing which has happened is, and will increase, is that black money in indirect transactions will decrease. More and more invoices have to be generated automatically with the tax. The black money circulation in this sector, but over time, not immediately, will decrease. So may I end, friends, by saying that I believe that it is an idea whose time perhaps had come in a large country like India. It is an idea which required much more care and caution. It was an idea which required, despite delay inherent, that care and caution to be exercised, devoid of ego, devoid of political one-upmanship, devoid of jumlebazi and optics. That did not happen, and you have at least 80% of the problems arising from that hurried, incomplete, botched up, and sometimes very, very superficial implementation of an idea large parts of which would be good. Thank you.